Hello, my darlings. Mother Raven here. Pardon my appearance. It's just this form makes it so much easier to hold a book, as you can imagine. So here am I, Mother Raven herself. And today I am starting a new series by William Schoene, this one called Raising Hell. Chapter 1. I'm a psychopath, but at least I used to be. I was an antisocial boy who lacked empathy and remorse for other people and animals. I was a bold person. I didn't care what people thought, and I stood my ground when necessary. I cared for nobody, not even myself most of the time. The question you are probably asking is, how did I get this way? I wasn't abused, nor was I influenced by a video game or a movie or a television show. Until the events of this book, I didn't know anything about violence or anything bad for that matter. I was an ordinary child with ordinary parents. I had a mother who was a biology teacher, who was a police officer. My mother was a great person. She was the sweetest, most loving woman you would ever meet. She was also very smart as well. She graduated from High Farm University with a degree in science and bachelor's degree. My father is a longtime police officer. He served in the LMPD for over 30 years and enjoyed protecting and serving the city of Louisville. However, he did try to keep me on a straight arrow as much as he could. He was quite strict. He kept a strong interest in my grades and schoolwork. Every time I got home from school, I was to get something to eat if I had to and start on my homework. No TV or video games until it was finished. My mother was often too focused on her work to really be that close to me. She would often stay at school until 8 o'clock at night to serve as Highlands cheerleading coach, so I would only get to spend time with her on weekends. When it came to school, I wasn't a very social person. All of the other kids would be socializing with each other, and they would be playing with toys and laughing while I just stayed by myself. I never had the desire to be around other people or in situations that were unfamiliar to me. I had really good grades though, because the way I saw it was that if you did well in regular school, things would turn out great when you made it to college. When I reached the age of 12, I was starting early stages of puberty. That was when I developed my urge. It was an urge to cause pain to other living things. It was a feeling that I call the mortem. I remember when I first felt the mortem. In 2008, I was in 5th grade and attending Alexander Hamilton Elementary School. It was show and tell. One of my classmates, Sally, had brought her hamster in to share with the class. When she was done telling the class about how much she loved her pet, she started letting everyone pass it around. When it was my turn to hold the hamster, I looked at the creature in my palm. It was soft and fat. Its fur felt like warm silk as I gently stroked its back. But that's when I began to feel it. A strong urge in my stomach. It was like an urge to eat something you really like. I wasn't planning on eating the hamster, but I knew I wanted something. That's when I began to form a mental picture of the creature, dead and bloodied on the floor. That's when I knew what I wanted. Without warning, I grabbed a pencil from my desk and stabbed it in the back. The rodent let out a painful squeal when I ripped the pencil into its body. It tried to run away when I pulled the pencil out, but I grabbed it and stabbed it one more time. Then I stood up and chucked it across the room with all my strength. It flew out of the window and on the ground floor. I felt a satisfying feeling go through my body as I looked around the classroom at the shocked faces of my classmates and teachers. I took a good look at the blood on my hands and I swear to you that my accomplishment made me feel like a god. But to my teacher and classmates, I seemed like a complete and utter lunatic. "Jordan, what have you done?" my teacher cried. I sat down wondering what was to happen next. But then I heard the soft sound of Sally crying. That's when I knew I was in a lot of trouble. "Go to the vice principal's office." "Mrs. Jones," I said, trying to stay in class. "Now, Jordan." I slowly made my way to the door. As I walked out, I looked back and saw another student comforting Sally as she sobbed over her departed hamster. I walked out of the class and closed the door behind me. As I made my way down the hall to the staircase and trudged downstairs to the assistant principal's office, I must have looked like I was going to my death sentence. I walked in and sat down in front of an appalled assistant principal. She was on the phone with Mrs. Jones, being told about the tragedy that had just struck our class. I could see on her face that she was shocked by what I did. When she hung up the phone, she let her face rest in her hands and let out a stressful sigh. "This would have to be the worst situation I've dealt with in all my years of working in the education field," she expressed. "I've dealt with fights, rumors, and even inappropriate photos, but this is sick." I frowned. "So you think I'm some kind of sick person, Mrs. Amy?" I asked. "I think what you did was sick. But no, I don't think you're sick," she said. "You killed that poor girl's hamster. Do you realize how horrible that is?" I said nothing. "I'm going to call your parents because I have no choice but to suspend you." My assistant principal called my mother first, but got no answer. That was when I started to get scared. If she didn't get a hold of my mother, she was going to call my dad. And my dad wasn't going to take kindly to me being in trouble at school, especially with something as major as this. When she called my father, I hoped beyond anything he was out on patrol or doing anything that prevented him from coming to the school or answering the phone. But he answered. I could tell by Mrs. Amy's expression that my father wasn't pleased with what I did, as she explained what happened. And when the phone call ended, things got heated. "How on earth could you bring yourself to do such a thing?" Mrs. Amy demanded. "I don't know," I lied. "Yes, you do," she protested. "There has to be some kind of motive. Did she hit you? Did she steal money from you? There has to be some reason for doing this." I gave her a dark stare as I sat in my chair, waiting for the awkward quiet that comes with lack of answers. This woman wasn't going to accept the fact that I killed the hamster just because I felt like it, so I didn't think an answer was appropriate. "This wouldn't have happened back in my day," she complained. "Nobody was going around killing animals like you did." "Well, it isn't your day anymore, is it?" I remarked. "My dad tells me there are people out there who would kill your whole family and not even spit an apology in your direction." "You have a mouth on you, don't you?" she sneered. "If I wouldn't get thrown in jail right now, I would jump over this desk and beat your behind." I opened my mouth to tell her to come over here and try it, but my dad burst into the office, ending our heated discussion. "So you're killing people's hamsters, Jordan?" my dad interrupted. I looked away from him. I had a small fear of my old man when he was angry, even though I knew he would never do anything to hurt me. My parents didn't believe in corporal punishment, but when I was 12, my dad was twice my size. He was quite intimidating at a glance. He was a tall, bald man who carried a stern look on his face everywhere he went. He hardly ever showed that he had a soft side, even to my mom. I don't remember them showing any sort of affection towards each other, at least not in front of me. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Dad snapped. I looked up at him. "Do you realize the pain you've caused that little girl? Not to mention how much money that animal probably cost her parents." "I'm sorry," I whimpered. Don't tell me sorry. You need to apologize to that little girl. My dad was angrier than I had ever seen him in my entire life. It was like I'd killed his hamster. So what's going to happen to him? My dad asked Mrs. Amy. I'm suspending him for 3 days, she said. He will be given 10 days to complete his makeup work when he returns. Is there any way he can have his work sent home? He asked. I can always run by here and pick it up when he needs it. I don't want him to be unoccupied while he's on punishment. There is. I will pick up whatever work he receives from Mrs. Jones, and you can come here and pick it up. Thank you. You're welcome, Officer Wallace, she said as she stared keenly at my father's badge. As for you, young man, go get your things and come straight back here, my dad said. I left the office and went back to my locker to get my backpack and books. As I was gathering my things, I knew that this was going to be a long suspension. I was going to be grounded in my room doing homework, and I was dreading this to the absolute fullest. When I got back to the office, my dad and I left the building and got into his police cruiser. As we made our way home, we had a very eye-opening discussion. What you did was pure evil. I hope you realize that, he said. I didn't respond. Prisons all over the world are full of serial killers, and they all started killing by doing what you did. Killing hamsters? I guessed. Killing small animals. Things that couldn't protect themselves, he corrected. It's an animal. I bet millions of other hamsters were born in its place, I protested. That's beside the point, Jordan. You took the life of another living thing, and that's terrible. It's the first sign of a serial killer. For all I know, this could spark a series of mass murders. I thought that was ridiculous. I'd felt the urge to kill, but I knew for sure that I wouldn't kill tens of thousands of people like that. I would be in jail or more likely executed. I killed one little hamster, that was it. I knew it would be different if I killed a human being. Dad, I promise I won't kill any more hamsters or animals ever again. Dad rolled his eyes at me after I said that. Let me tell you a story, Dad said. 3 years after I became an officer, my partner at the time and myself were called to take care of a domestic dispute. What's that? I asked. That's when there's a problem with someone a person lives with. Anyway, when we got to the house, we did our thing and beat on the door and yelled for them to let us in. That's when a woman answered the door. She had a bruised face along with 2 black eyes and was screaming at us to come in because her husband was drunk, going crazy, and hitting her and the kids. I asked where the husband was, and she had us follow her into the kitchen. The man was screaming his head off and throwing dishes. I looked over at my partner, and he was wide-eyed and pale. I asked him what was wrong, and he pointed at a battered and bruised little boy on the floor. He looked about your age. Ouch, I said, feeling a touch of remorse for the poor boy. I stared in shock at the boy's lifeless body. Then I suddenly heard my partner yell, "Look out!" A beer bottle flew right past my face and shattered on the wall behind me. I drew my gun at him and told him to stop and put his hands behind his head. He started yelling things at his wife and telling her that he didn't deserve to go to jail, and that she and the kids had the beatings coming because that's how you punished a woman and children. I was growing tired of this nonsense. I told him to shut up and get down on the ground. However, instead of listening to me, he grabbed an empty beer bottle and smashed it on the kitchen table. Before I could tell him to stop, he charged at me with the broken half of the bottle. "What did you do about that?" I asked. My dad sighed. "I shot him." "Really?" I gasped. "Right in the throat," he added. The husband fell backwards on the floor and held his neck as he bled out. I yelled for my partner to call an ambulance. While he was calling dispatch, I checked on the kid who was on the ground. It was too late for him. He was dead, beaten to death by his own father. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw another kid across the room, a little girl, She was laying face down and her head was caved in. A golf club lay covered in blood and hair right next to her. I could see the tears forming in Father's eyes as he gripped the steering wheel harder. I was kind of afraid he might burst into tears, but he was just silent for a short time. "What happened to the woman after this?" I asked. "After she was treated at the hospital, she went through a long depression. I was there to help her and paid for her therapy bills. I comforted her when she needed me as we began to get to know each other. She wasn't very monetarily successful. She lived on food stamps and a welfare check. She couldn't really hold a job because she was bipolar and couldn't always afford the medication. So her emotions would often lead her to getting fired. After years of help, I paid for her to go to school. And eventually things worked out for her and us." "What happened?" I asked. Dad looked at me and cracked a smile. "We dated for a few years, and then one day I proposed to her. We got married, and 17 years later on, we had a son named Jordan. Why did it take so long to have me? Your mother and I kept trying to have a kid, but after so long, we just gave up. We accepted that children weren't for us, but then one morning, your mother comes to tell me she's pregnant. It was a strange feeling. I thought we were infertile, but out of the blue, fate decides we should have a kid." I'm getting off subject. The point I'm trying to make is killing is wrong. And not only does it hurt the person you killed, but it hurts their loved ones as well, he stated. Believe it or not, animals have loved ones too. Did you know some dogs have been reported to mourn their masters when they die? "Really?" I said. "I'll keep that in mind. When we get home, I want you to go straight to your room and think long and hard about everything that happened today. You are only to come out to use the bathroom. Your mother and I will bring food to you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad," I accepted. I was grounded for the rest of the week, and the weekend as well. I wasn't allowed to watch television or play video games. My video games were taken out of my room, but my TV was too big to be moved. Dad had bought me a big flat screen for my birthday the year before, and he wasn't going to unplug it and haul it away to the basement. Instead, he said if he heard the TV on, he'd add a week to my punishment. As I served my time, I did hours of homework each day, and after I was done, all that I was allowed to do was read books or go to bed. I was so bored that I actually ended up taking my father up on reading a few books. My time being grounded was the longest 5 days I have ever experienced. After that had passed, things were still not exactly good. I was shunned by my class. Absolutely nobody wanted anything to do with me. When it came to group work, my teacher either forced a group of kids to work with me, or I was to work by myself. I had nobody. I was alone. 3 weeks went by like this until somebody came up with a name for me. It all started at recess one afternoon. "Hey, hamster killer," a voice said as something hit my head. I reached for the back of my head and touched something slimy and wet. It was mud. I turned around and saw 3 girls standing a short distance away from me. There was a tall, brown-haired girl with mud on her hands, and 2 others at her side. "Been having fun picking your next victim?" nagged the leader. She dug out another chunk of mud and chucked it at my chest, ruining my white t-shirt. They all proceeded to chuck mud at me as I stood helplessly, taking each blow. It wasn't long before I was covered in mud. I was growing angry, and I wasn't going to take this any longer. That's when I exploded with rage and let out a massive word cry. Charging at the group of lousy punks, I hit the leader hard, right between the eyes, and she fell to the ground, right into the mud she had been collecting from. I thought she'd stay down, but she came right back up and swung at me. Dodging her hook, I ducked and punched her as hard as I could directly in her eye. She screamed as she held her eye in pain. I kicked her in the stomach, and she fell to the ground once more. I then turned to her friends and proceeded to beat them both into next week. After I was finished with them, they were both lying in the dirt, knocked out, and their leader was next to them crying. After I was finished, I realized I was surrounded by my classmates who'd been watching the whole thing. Next thing I knew, Mrs. Jones had me by the shirt collar and was dragging me back to the school. As my teacher pulled me with bitter strength, I saw through the large crowd of rowdy kids. My previous victim, Sally, was looking directly at me and smirking as if to mock me. I felt the mortem run through my body once again. I knew what I had to do. I pushed myself from Mrs. Jones' grip and with all my might ripping the back of my shirt, leaving with a fistful of cloth while I charged screaming towards Sally. My classmates all ran in different directions as I made my way towards Sally. When my target was clear, I threw myself at her, and we fell to the ground as I began beating her. I threw punch after punch with every bit of strength I had in me. I kept beating the girl. I beat her until bruises formed on her face, and those bruises turned into gashes that spit blood onto my fist. I then felt something grab onto me. I flew backwards as I kicked and screamed. That was when I realized that the assistant principal had me, and I was in deep trouble. Once again, my father was called to the school. He stormed into the office with a crimson face and was ready to explode. "Is this going to be a regular thing?" he hollered. "Mr. Wallace, I'm going to ask you to calm down before I can explain anything," she said, clearly intimidated by him. "I'm sorry, but this is really bad. First a hamster, and now this. Oh my God, I hope my son doesn't turn into a woman beater." "I'm not a woman beater," I protested. "You beat up 4 girls, one of them being the girl whose hamster you killed," he told me. "First you kill her hamster, and now you beat her up. What the hell is wrong with you?" "Well, Mr. Wallace, your son isn't totally at fault. 3 of the girls were throwing mud at him." "Then why wasn't the teacher doing anything?" Dad asked. "She thought it was a game, which is understandable because—" "Are you freaking joking? I mean, what kind of shit is that?" my dad scoffed. "Please watch your language, sir. This is a school," she demanded. "My son was getting mud chucked at him, and the teacher wasn't doing anything?" Mrs. Amy fell silent. "It seems like Mrs. Jones needs to control her students better, don't you think?" my dad said, mocking her. "The other children will be dealt with. And as for Jordan, he is going to be suspended for 6 days instead of 3. "All right," I said. "Should she get my homework again?" "Shut up, Jordan," my dad snapped. It took a moment to compose himself before letting out a sigh. "I will be dropping by for his homework again, and this is the last time he will be getting suspended," Dad said, giving me a firm stare. After the conversation ended, I went to my locker and grabbed my things. My dad got in the car before me and said nothing as I opened the door to the passenger side before he began driving home. "I guess I'm grounded again." "Nope," Dad assured. "I learned that just teaches you how to do time, and you'll wind up back grounded again, just like some criminals live. I once put away the same convict 3 times, but that's another story. What I have in store for you is going to work far better than being without your privileges." "What's that?" "It's called the Scared Straight program, and it's where you get taken to a real jail and you get shown what it's like to get processed, booked, and locked away forever." "That doesn't sound pleasant," I commented. "It isn't supposed to be. It's time you learned how to grow up. You're going into the 6th grade in 3 months? So I need you to enter middle school a new person. You'll be going tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. "So I still have to get up early?" "Consider that part of your punishment, having to get up early for something uncomfortable." "School's already uncomfortable enough," I remarked. "Exactly," Dad replied. "You're going to meet convicts who are in the same situation you are, fighting and other crazy nonsense. It's going to show you that you need to change your ways or things will only get worse. I went home a free man that day, but I was unprepared for what was to occur next. I was going to be in a hellhole that criminals were sent to rot in, some of them forever. I didn't think I deserved to go through this over a stupid hamster and a fight, but what could I do? It wasn't like I had a choice. The next morning, Dad woke me up at 6:45 in the morning. After I got ready, we went to Bob Evans for breakfast. It didn't start that way, but we ended up having a bit of a pre-scared straight talk as we ate. "So this is supposed to help me not kill any more animals?" I asked, diving into my stack of pancakes. "This program will show you the consequences of your action. If you keep doing what you're doing," he explained, "you're going to see what it's like to spend your life in prison, and hopefully you'll change after all this." "Have you ever arrested anyone for killing an animal?" "Once," Dad answered, cutting a piece of his omelet off and eating it. "A guy shot his neighbor's dog because it was barking all night. The woman didn't end up finding the dog dead till the next morning." "So how did she know it was a neighbor?" I asked. Dad took another bite of his omelet before responding. "The woman and her neighbor argued off and on about her beagle barking every night. The neighbor worked as a day shift professor at U of L and had to be to work at 4:30 every morning, so sleep was important to him. He claimed that he would catch a few hours of sleep, but wouldn't be able to go back to bed because of the dog. His sleep deprivation was cutting into his work habits, so I kept talking to the dog's owner about it, but things always ended in an argument that would go nowhere." "Damn," I commented. "Watch your mouth," Dad said. "The professor ended up buying a .22 caliber pistol and just shot the poor thing. He shot it through a hole in the fence, so he wouldn't break any trespassing laws on top of the crime he'd already committed," I said. Dad nodded. "Exactly," he replied. "He was charged with animal cruelty and had to pay a $500 fine, which was nothing to him since he made quite a bit of money as a professor. The woman tried to sue him, but lost the case." "Why are you afraid I'll kill a person if I kill animals?" I asked, finishing the last of my pancakes. "That's how it all starts. Look it up if you don't believe me. Serial killers start out torturing little animals. Then later they end up killing people. I never understood killers. They kill just to see the blood, and eventually they always get caught." "Do you think I will meet some killers today?" I asked. "Maybe," Dad answered, finishing his omelet. "I do know that we'd better get to the station before you get left behind." The drive to the police station was short, and when we arrived, I saw a group of kids standing next to a school bus. The kids looked to be much older than me, and to make matters worse, most were bigger than me. I was afraid this would happen. These kids looked to be hardcore to the very end. They were probably more of what people would call at risk than I was. My dad told me to get with the group of kids while he signed me in. All of the other kids were socializing with one another, but that was cut short when two men walked over to us. There was a huge, muscular, gray-haired man wearing a black prison guard uniform. He was at least 6'4" and had a deadly scowl on his face, along with a scar running down his left cheek. The other was a younger buff guy wearing a black skin-tight shirt and skinny jeans with a whistle around his neck. I could also see his police badge hooked to his belt near his crotch. I guess he was trying to advertise. This guy looked more like a summer camp counselor than somebody who would be in a program like this one. He looked like he was in his mid-20s and probably carried a cocky attitude about how he went to bed with a lot of women. He blew the whistle with every ounce of breath he had in it to get our attention. It was the loudest, most ear-piercing sound I had ever heard in my life. It was like a dog whistle made for humans. It was made to break us down and ensure that we submit to order. It didn't take long to recover from the high-pitched weapon from hell, but the two men surely had our attention. Well, my darling, that is quite the takeoff to our little story. And and I will probably be doing this series once a week. So, that's all for now. So quoth this raven.